Okay, thanks for tuning in for our Deerfield High School and Middle School co-extracurricular information and code meeting. Before I get into kind of the main part of the meeting, I just want to point out to people where to find our athletic schedules. It's something I have included the last few years in this video, and we've had a little bit of a change this year as far as how our schedules are going to be housed on the internet. If you go to our district homepage and you see down on the bottom right hand side the link to athletic schedules, that's still going to be there just like normal. But us and everybody else in the Trailways Conference and a lot of schools in the state are going to be going to Bound this year. In the past, schedules were done on something called Our School. Everybody's moving towards Bound. And so I really encourage people to get used to this link with Bound. And I'll toggle just back and forth. Athletic schedules on our home page will take you to Bound, where you can then find all of our schedules. So please reach out if you have any questions. This is a mandatory video for all Deerfield High School and middle school students that are involved not only in athletics, but additionally any clubs that during the school day, and even some sixth graders who can do some sports are needing to watch this video as well. So co-extracurriculars, just in general, things that are included that are going to have to follow the rules that we're going to go over. Obviously, athletics, we have music, drama, etc. on this list. Obviously, from year to year, this can change a little bit. Here's all our current athletic programs. Obviously, all of these are high school. Some of these are middle school. And at the current time, here's our academic clubs and activities that also fall under the guidelines of this code. These are mainly high school clubs, but some of these also are in the middle school as well. And again, this list probably more than any can change from year to year as new clubs come and go. Remember that participation in any of these things is a privilege. And with that, we're assuming that you're going to take on the responsibilities that we're going to now outline in the co-extracurricular code. So the four main areas, and I know a lot of you that have heard this video before, a lot of the information isn't going to be new, but we're going to go through school attendance, academic standards, behavioral standards, and then eligibility standards, which essentially boils down to the paperwork that you need to turn in to be eligible. And then at the end of the video, there's just some other areas of emphasis that I want to spend just a little bit of time going over, but don't worry, I won't keep anybody too long here. School attendance probably goes without saying, but you need to be enrolled as a full-time student at Deerfield, attend all your classes, be in school all day. Of course, there are some exceptions to that. And of course, in this day and age, especially in the high school, the kids aren't necessarily in the building all day long. There are some college classes they take off site. There's youth apprenticeship. But whatever your schedule says you need to be doing, you need to be there all day. Of course, things come up, doctor's appointments, college visits, etc. Absences that are excused. When possible, complete an advance makeup slip with your teacher ahead of time. If it's an emergency, flat tire first thing in the morning, let's say, call the school as soon as possible, because then these absences can be excused and you are still eligible to participate in your sports or your activities later that evening. Unexcused absences, those are the things that are going to keep you out of your evening practices and events. Please note on this slide that being tardy is considered unexcused and will result in the student being ineligible. And also, for example, if you have 7 a.m. show choir, treble choir, that's the start of your school day, so you do need to be there by 7 a.m. So again, just kind of toggling back to the last slide just to really emphasize it. And communication is the key here. We know things come up, there's appointments. As long as everything's cleared with the office and you're excused, you'll be okay to participate later that evening. The unexcused ones are when we start running into an issue. As far as just practice attendance, and so I think this is kind of when you are in school, but then maybe you have something after school where you're not able to attend a practice or a club meeting. You are expected to notify your coach or your advisor. although we have attendance reports that they get, and they can kind of see who's in and who's out during the day. If you have something that comes up where you're going to miss a basketball practice, for example, you need to tell the coach. Not telling them and then not being at practice counts as an unexcused absence. And although each team can have kind of slightly different rules on how they handle some of these things, one general guideline that we have for all of our clubs and our teams: 4 unexcused absences will result in removal from a team. And we also note here that missing a practice or a game in sports to play in a non-school sponsored sport is considered a non-excused absence as well. So if you miss your high school basketball practice for a club tournament, that does count as a non-excused absence. Um, we haven't had to enforce this very often. I think generally when people have good communication, our coaches are flexible. We like to work with kids because we know they're involved in a lot of different things. Um, but just we put this rule in so there was some teeth, um, and kind of show kids that there's a priority to be at your school event once you've made a commitment to it. Something that doesn't happen too often with most of our students, but if you are deemed to be truant, um, there are additional penalties that come with this. You'd be ineligible for your next co-extracurricular event. So if you're a baseball player, for example, and you get truancy charges through the school, you would have to sit out a game. Not something I'm going to spend too much time going into here. Certainly, with any of this stuff, if you have questions, feel free to reach out. Moving off of our attendance standards, we get to academics. And I think the main thing to remember here is, as a student, this is middle or high school, you cannot have any Fs and you cannot have any more than one D. And we'll briefly get into the different times during the quarter and how these grades can affect you. But no Fs, no more than one D, I think is the main thing to remember. And you see at the bottom of this slide, we do grade checks at 3 and 6 weeks of each quarter. And then, of course, at the end of the quarter at 9 weeks when your grades are final. So I'm just going to use the 3-week grade check for example. I run a grade check of all the athletes and all the kids that are in other clubs. If Johnny has 3 Ds, and that would make him ineligible, he is not ineligible automatically right then. Notify him, notify the coach or the advisor. You have a week to improve your grades. And so there's no penalty initially. You get a kind of a probationary status to improve these grades. If after the week Johnny has improved up to where he has no more than 1D, he's good to go. No penalty. But if he still has bad grades at that point, let's say he's on the football team, he would be ineligible to play in any games until those grades improve. And before I get into the 9-week stuff, so that's the 3 and the 6 week, there is no set penalty. It is just ineligibility. You get your week, and then if things don't improve after that, you're only out as long as your grades still haven't improved. But if we get to the end of the quarter and you have 2Ds or 1F, that is when there are some hard and set penalties because the grades are final. We have what we call level 1 and level 2 ineligibilities. Level 1, that is just when you have a single F or multiple Ds. If you're an athlete, you will have to sit out 20% of your schedule. We make it a percentage because based on the sport, different teams play different amount of games during the season. So if you're a high school football player and you only play 9 games during your season, that 20% is only going to be a couple games. If you're a softball player where you play 20 to 25 games in a season, that could be 4 or 5 games. Level 2 ineligibilities are when students have multiple Fs. So we kind of figure that the penalty needs to be a little stiffer here. And essentially, without reading through this whole list, if you're an athlete, it ends up being about 50% of your schedule that you're out for. The reason we have different guidelines depending on which quarter of the year we're in is just with fall sports starting before the school year even begins, spring sports going after the school year ends. We just had to come up with a system that made it somewhat equitable depending on the time of the year we were in. I'm going to toggle back just briefly because I realized I just talked mostly about athletics. We do have those co-extracurricular clubs that often have events, and you can see if it's a level 1 in eligibility, you miss your club's next event if it occurs within the first 3 weeks of the quarter. Level 2 is you're ineligible for any event that would be in the first 3 weeks of the following quarter. So maybe not as cut and dry as the sports teams, but certainly if you're in any of those other extracurriculars, there is still a penalty to be served if the grades were poor at the end of the quarter. Now moving on to our behavioral standards, and this is kind of probably the widest ranging area because we have everything from underage drinking and illegal drug use to improper language or social media. And so here's just a statement, just kind of talking about how we want our student athletes and our students that are in other clubs and activities to represent Deerfield High School and middle school properly. Um, and whether or not the behavior takes place during the school day or outside of school hours, all of these things are included under the co-extracurricular code. I will actually start with social media. Every year that goes by, there's more and more ways for kids to get in trouble here, and that's not to say social media can't be a great tool, but we just like to remind our students that all forms of social media are subject to the same standards of the code of conduct as all other situations. So if a picture gets posted of you online and somehow that gets turned over to the school and it shows you drinking at a party or something like that, that can be used to be turned into a code violation. Um, there's other improper things just with language usage or bullying other students that can be put on social media. All of that stuff, again, could come back to bite you. So just think before you put something out there. And just please remember, if you're doing something that violates the code, maybe you trust the people that you're with and someone decides to take your picture or do whatever and turn it over to us, then we have issues. So it's just a cautionary tale for students. It does seem every year that someone gets in trouble for something like this. So just an FYI and just a warning to kind of think before something is out there about you on social media. Kind of another area that is kind of an all-encompassing thing, and there's a lot of different situations here, but just remember that the use of racial slurs, terminology will not be tolerated during any of our co-extracurricular activities. There certainly is probably language that is funny between you and your friends, but it may be offensive to someone else. So again, just similar with the social media, just a word of warning to watch what you're saying around the locker rooms, around the practice fields, in a classroom after school, when you're at a meeting, and all of those things. Alcohol, drug, other substances. It's understood that you refrain from any of these things. Probably this is the one that hasn't changed for 50 years or more. But I think the one thing to point out here is that it is understood that attendance at a party where underage drinking or illegal drugs are being used could also constitute a code violation. Now, there are exceptions to that, which I'm going to get into in just a minute, but just know that party gets busted and 10 kids get underage drinking tickets and you were there and you weren't drinking, if we find out that you were there, you could still get a code violation. Again, not going to read this whole chart. This is all in our code handbook. And certainly if you have questions, you can reach out. But when you get a violation of this sort, if you're an athlete, your first violation is 20% of your schedule, similar to the grades. Second violation, 40% of the season. Third violation, a full year. Non-athletics, you can see that's the next event, next two events, so on and so forth. If you see highlighted in red, we also have a requirement where you do counseling with the school counselor. 2 hours of counseling for any of these things. And I want to note that this slide is just for attendance at parties. And again, I'm going to just toggle back and forth here briefly. This slide is if you actually get caught consuming. So let's just use underage drinking as an example. You can see that the percentages between these two slides for just being at a party or actually being at a party and drinking are the same. But what increases are the hours of counseling. So again, all this stuff is in our handbook. But just to kind of show you the difference a few times here. Also, any violation during the season, and this is probably more for the athletes, results in the loss of you being able to receive any major team awards during the season, or if you have to serve your violation going into the next season in that season as well. So you wouldn't be eligible for MVP and things like that. Other items to note here quickly, the counseling. You're required to complete it within 1 month from the date on your notification letter of your code violation. And we go over this in great detail with any student that gets a violation. But failure to complete your counseling within a month makes you ineligible for a full calendar year, which is a pretty hefty suspension. But we put that into place just to make sure that kids are following through on their counseling because we do think it's a valuable tool. Um, and again, there is some flexibility there. You know, if you have your last day of counseling scheduled and we have a snow day at school and it's right up against that month, we obviously give some wiggle room there. But just in general, you have a month to complete it. And just remember that violations of the code of conduct are cumulative and can be carried over into the next season or even the next school year. And that's not even just a Deerfield rule, that's a WIAA thing. And I think we get into that a little more here in a little bit. So, what if I arrive at a party, find out it is not what I was expecting? There's alcohol present. What should I do? First thing you do, leave immediately, call your parents if necessary, get a ride, so on and so forth if we need to investigate. You certainly can choose to not give us more information if you don't want to bust your friends, but any information that you can give, show us on your cell phone that you called mom and dad can kind of help you get out of trouble. Just a note here, what if, for example, I'm a football player and I'm also involved in a club, you do end up having to serve a suspension in both. Sometimes you get to the end of a season and you don't have time to complete that entire 20% because the season ends. We do figure out how much of that percent you need to still serve in your next sports season. And again, every situation's a little different, so we go over these specifics if and when an athlete or somebody who's just in a club gets coded. Again, I mentioned this earlier, the WA requires that your athletic suspension carries into your next season. So the example I use here, let's say you're a spring athlete only. We would make note of that suspension, and if and when you're in a sport, you do have to serve it before you're eligible to participate. There is an appeal process. This is outlined in much greater detail in our handbook, but I think the gist of it here is that the appeal process is not to argue for a reduced suspension, but it's to argue that if you think you were wrongly accused. Okay, moving on through the eligibility standards. Basically, what paperwork do I need to turn in? And this first slide is just for sports. There's only 2 forms you have to turn in. You either need to turn in your physical, your medical eligibility form, or an alternate year form. So this hasn't changed forever and ever. You get a physical, it's typically a green form, or this day and age, sometimes it's just a white form or either digital. That's good for 2 years. In that other year where you don't need a physical, there's an alternate year form. Sometimes it's yellow. So every year you're needing to turn in one of those 2 forms to the office. We have lists of what kids need which form. So if you have questions, please ask us. We also have a code form, which is now an online Google form that you need to sign off on to be eligible for athletics. I'm going to go over in just a little bit more what's on that online Google form. Once you have everything turned in, you get a red card, which you turn into your coach, and that is your coach's way of knowing you are clear to participate. All these forms are available online on the school district website as well. If you're a non-athlete, you obviously don't need a physical, but the code form is the only thing that you need to sign. We have a little note on the bottom that for senior trip, prom, king, and queen, things that don't happen until the spring, you still need to turn in your code form by October 1st to be eligible for any of these activities. A note here, high school students only. We do have a random drug testing program, so when you do sign off on agreeing to the terms of our co-extracurricular code, you are also agreeing to be part of the random drug testing. And without going over all of this here, 4 students are tested on average once every 2 weeks. We literally have nothing to do with who was picked. Every student in our high school is just a number on a list, and it's an outside company that comes in and tests. 2 to 3 days after a student is tested, we get the results in the district, and if there's a positive test, we go forward from there. Athletes only. One of the things you sign off on the form I was talking about is acknowledging the risks of concussions in athletics. All of this language can be found on our school website. This is stuff laid out by the state of Wisconsin and the WIAA. Additionally, you're signing off on the acknowledgement of the risk of cardiac arrest rest in sports. And once again, just like the concussion information, this is all on our district website. High school athletes only. There is a WIA rules of eligibility portion of the form. The WIA is a fantastic organization, but they do have a lot of rules. You can find links to all of this stuff online. And this is one area where I tell athletes and parents, please, 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 if you have questions about any of this stuff, do not hesitate to reach out and ask. Again, just a note about the physicals. I think we went over this enough. Physicals are good for every 2 school years, not calendar years, something I can point out on this slide that is good to know. So again, if you have questions about the dates that physicals are good for, just ask either myself or probably Mrs. Haig in the district office, who keeps lists of all of these things. Okay, other items to note. We are almost done. I'm just going to do some quick hitters on some things. You can see on this slide what that is going to entail. All of these things are covered in much more detail in our extracurricular handbook, or of course, you can always talk to me in person or via email. Transportation, I think the gist of it here is we always provide transportation to and from all our away extracurricular events. But with the pinch with bus drivers, that hasn't gotten any better. We are still in a shortage. We do have forms that will allow parents to drive other people's kids to events. Just as always, parents can talk to the coach and sign off on bringing their own kid home from an event. Sometimes we're bringing school vans. I think the moral of the story here is we'll always have some kind of transportation, especially for our athletes, to and from events. And myself will work with the coaches and the parents to arrange other forms of transportation if we don't have a school bus available. Injury prevention, athlete wellness. I think first the bottom one on here, the mental health resources, that has become a bigger and bigger deal as we have gone forward, not only in Deerfield, but in other schools. And so we do have some resources here we're going to talk about. And then just with our injury guidelines, just making sure people know that we have an athletic trainer, and then we have some return to play policies, and also if we have medical emergencies. I think medical emergencies, nothing has really changed here. There's a chain of command that'll happen if an athlete gets hurt in an event. Our athletic trainer is available at most home athletic events, mainly the varsity ones, and they do visit the school twice a week. Student or the parents can sign the athlete up in the office. Coaches have access to a Google form where the kids can sign up as well. And our trainers are very, very good, I think, at helping our athletes get healthy and get back onto the field as quickly as possible. A note here, and we've been trying to emphasize this on return to play. If an athlete sees a doctor for an injury that was sustained in sports, they must get a doctor's note that clears them to return. So just know that. Just a really generic example I used, if you have a severely sprained ankle, we are not telling you to not go to the doctor, but just know that if you do then need a note clearing you. So that's where we also try to use our athletic trainer, and I have a note here about adhering to their guidance. Sometimes these sports injuries, if there's an avenue to see the athletic trainer first and then have them kind of determine if you also need to see a doctor, just so we have kind of good communication on this. But just know that a doctor visit does trigger the need to have a note to return. Mental health resources. All our coaches, all our club advisors have contact information for the school social worker and counselor. Coaches are encouraged to talk to these people if they see a concern. So just know that we are watching over our students as they are with us at after school activities. NIL language. It is now legal for high school kids to benefit from their name, image, and likeness, but there are a lot of specifics here, so please ask before you pursue anything related to your name, image, and likeness. Again, we're going to have all this information linked in our handbook and on our website, but this is a brave new world with some new guidelines for high school athletes, and I know it doesn't affect many of them, but for the ones that do, we just need to make sure that we are following the rules that the WIAA has laid out. Performance enhancing substance policies. Again, the WIA has a list of banned substances that cannot be used by high school athletes. The WIA also has a list of discouraged substances, items that cannot be used in conjunction with school-based programs. So again, just something to point out. And once again, this is all linked online. I think with all of this stuff, communication is the nature of the beast. You're encouraged to talk to your coach and advisor first. Myself as the athletic director or other administrators can get involved when necessary. Thanks for watching. Again, this was a lot of information. I just under 25 minutes, and that was my goal to keep it about there. But as the school year goes forward, find these resources online. And again, I've said it about 10 times during this meeting. Do not hesitate to reach out and ask if you have questions regarding any of this stuff. Thank you.